I'm Anna, and I'm 32 years old. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut on my sister Emily's wrists still echoes in my head 3 hours later. The metal was cold, unforgiving, just like the look she gave me as the officer read her rights. Her tears came way too late. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt betrayed by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to where this nightmare really started, because the fraud that nearly destroyed my life began long before Daniel ever touched my bank account. It started with success. My success. And apparently that was my biggest mistake. When I bought my Manhattan apartment last fall, I thought my family would be proud. 2-bedroom, corner unit, Riverview, paid in cash. The kind of place you work 15-hour days to afford. The kind of achievement that should have warranted celebration. Instead, I got strained smiles and uncomfortable silences at the family dinner where I shared the news. My brother Michael barely spoke that night. He kept walking around my living room, touching surfaces like he was appraising them, his jaw getting tighter with each expensive detail he noticed. The imported marble countertops, the hardwood floors, the custom lighting, everything I'd carefully chosen and saved for. Emily was different. She visited constantly after that, always with elaborate compliments about my little place. She'd run her fingers along my furniture, asking pointed questions about prices and payment methods. "You must be doing so well for yourself," she'd say with that smile that never quite reached her eyes. The truth is, I wasn't showing off. I've never been that type. This apartment was just the natural result of years of smart investments, strategic career moves, and living below my means while building my financial consulting practice. But somehow, my success became their problem. Michael stopped returning my calls as frequently. Emily's visits became interrogations disguised as sister time. Family gatherings turned into subtle competitions where my achievements were either minimized or completely ignored. I remember thinking how strange it was that the people who should have been happiest for me seemed the most uncomfortable with my progress. I had no idea they were already planning their solution. The first hint of trouble came during Emily's birthday dinner in June. Michael kept checking his phone, distracted and agitated. When Emily asked about his restaurant renovation business, his face darkened. "Market's tight right now," he muttered. Some projects fell through. Emily nodded sympathetically, but I caught the look they exchanged. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, but it carried the weight of shared secrets and mutual understanding. They were in trouble, financial trouble, and they were looking at me like I was the answer. The money requests started small and seemingly innocent. Michael needed a loan for equipment repairs. Just $5,000. He'd pay it back within the month. Emily's freelance graphic design client was late on payment. Could I cover her rent until the check came through? I said yes both times. Family helps family, right? That's what I'd been raised to believe. But the payback never came. Michael's equipment loan became a business investment opportunity that just needed a little more capital. Emily's rent assistance became a pattern of monthly emergencies that always seemed to coincide with her mortgage due dates. 6 months later, I'd lent them nearly $40,000 combined. Not one penny had been repaid. When I finally brought up the mounting debt during a family barbecue, both siblings looked at me like I'd committed some unforgivable social breach. "Wow, Anna," Emily said loudly enough for our parents to hear. "I didn't realize you were keeping such detailed track of family favors." Michael nodded gravely. Money really changes people, doesn't it? Our parents immediately sided with them. Mom pulled me aside to lecture me about the importance of family loyalty. Dad suggested I was being unnecessarily mercenary about what should be simple generosity between siblings. That night, I went home and did something I should have done months earlier. I calculated exactly how much I'd given them versus how much they'd contributed to family expenses, gifts, or emergencies over the past 5 years. The numbers were staggering. I'd covered Emily's car repairs, Michael's business failures, both of their children's birthday parties, and countless family dinners where I somehow always ended up with the check. Meanwhile, they'd contributed exactly nothing to our parents' anniversary celebration, Thanksgiving dinners, or even Christmas gifts for each other's kids. I was the family bank, and they were treating me like an ATM with no withdrawal limit. When I politely but firmly told them I wouldn't be lending any more money, their reactions revealed everything I needed to know about our relationships. Emily accused me of abandoning family during their darkest hour. Michael suggested I'd become cold and calculating since getting money. Neither one apologized for taking advantage of me. Neither one offered any timeline for repayment. They just made it clear that setting financial boundaries made me the villain in their story. I remember thinking that night how exhausting it was to love people who only seemed to value me for what I could provide. But I had no idea that their disappointment in my new boundaries was about to motivate something far worse than guilt trips and family drama. They were about to graduate from taking my money to stealing it. Have you ever experienced the moment when you realize your own family sees you more as a resource than a person? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The shift in my siblings' behavior after I cut off the money pipeline was immediate and unsettling. Where they'd once made token efforts at normal family interaction, now every conversation felt like a negotiation. Every family gathering became an opportunity for them to make passive-aggressive comments about my new attitude. Michael started making pointed remarks about how success had changed me, how I'd lost touch with what really mattered. Emily would sigh dramatically whenever money came up in any context, as if my presence alone was a reminder of her financial struggles. But the most disturbing part was how they began working together. Michael and Emily had never been particularly close before. Different personalities, different interests, different life paths. Suddenly, they were having whispered conversations at family dinners, exchanging knowing looks, presenting a united front against what they apparently saw as my selfishness. I found out later that this was when they started seriously discussing more drastic measures. The family dynamic became poisonous. Our parents, influenced by Michael and Emily's constant complaints about my coldness, started treating me differently too. Mom would make comments about how money couldn't buy happiness, clearly directed at me. Dad started praising Michael and Emily's resilience in facing their financial challenges, with the obvious implication that they were more noble for struggling than I was for succeeding. Christmas that year was particularly brutal. I'd prepared thoughtful, expensive gifts for everyone, while Michael and Emily showed up with obviously last-minute bargain store purchases. But somehow I was the one who got lectured about the true meaning of the holidays when I didn't enthusiastically praise their generic gift cards. Emily made a point of thanking Michael loudly for his meaningful present to her, a wooden picture frame that still had the clearance sticker on it, while barely acknowledging the professional photography session I'd arranged and paid for to update her business portfolio. That night, I overheard Emily on the phone with someone, though I couldn't make out the full conversation through the bathroom door. But I caught enough fragments to understand she was discussing me, my apartment, and something about teaching her a lesson. I should have paid more attention to that phone call. I should have trusted my instincts about the way they'd been behaving, but I was still operating under the assumption that family dysfunction had limits, that blood relationships came with certain unspoken protections. I was wrong about that. Spectacularly wrong. Because while I was trying to maintain relationships with people who increasingly seemed to resent my very existence, they were already planning the kind of betrayal that would make their previous selfishness look like harmless sibling rivalry. They weren't just angry about the money anymore. They wanted to destroy me for having the audacity to succeed without their permission. The plan they eventually executed was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its execution. I pieced together the full scope of their conspiracy only after everything fell apart, through police interviews, recovered text messages, and Daniel's eventual confession. It started with Emily remembering an old connection from her brief stint working at a logistics company 3 years earlier. Daniel Morrison had been a supervisor there, charming and competent, until he was quietly terminated following suspicions of inventory theft. Nothing was ever proven, no charges were filed, but he'd been blacklisted from similar positions. Since then, Daniel had been surviving on what detectives would later classify as sophisticated consumer fraud. Online shopping scams, identity theft, credit card manipulation. He was good at reading people, better at manipulating them, and excellent at disappearing when things got complicated. Emily reached out to him in January, just weeks after my Christmas gift had reminded her exactly how wide the gap between our financial situations had become. Her initial contact was supposedly innocent, just catching up with an old colleague. But their conversation quickly turned to my success, my apartment, my apparent wealth. Daniel was interested, very interested. The proposition they ultimately agreed on was elegant. Daniel would seduce me, gain access to my financial information, and extract as much money as possible before disappearing. The proceeds would be split 3 ways, Emily, Michael, and Daniel each taking a share. Michael's role was crucial. As my brother, he could vouch for Daniel's character, facilitate introductions, and provide the kind of family credibility that would lower my natural defenses. Emily would handle the social engineering, making sure I was emotionally vulnerable and ready for a relationship. They spent weeks crafting Daniel's persona. He couldn't appear too wealthy, that would make me suspicious. But he couldn't seem desperate either. I was too smart to fall for obvious financial manipulation. He needed to be successful enough to be attractive, stable enough to be trustworthy, but not so impressive that he'd outshine my own achievements. They settled on a consulting engineer, recently relocated to New York for work. Divorced, no kids, financially stable but not flashy. The kind of man who would appreciate my success without being threatened by it. someone who would fit naturally into my professional world without raising questions about his background. Emily handled the backstory research, creating social media profiles that went back years, establishing connections with mutual acquaintances, even planting positive references among people in my network. Michael would vouch for Daniel's character based on business connections that were entirely fabricated. The most chilling part of their plan was how well they understood me. They knew I'd been single for over 2 years, focused on building my business. They knew I was cautious about dating, particularly about men who might be interested in my financial success rather than me personally. So they created exactly the kind of man I would trust. Someone who seemed indifferent to money, who never asked personal questions about my finances, who appeared to have his own established life and career. They knew me well enough to manipulate me perfectly. And I walked into their trap with my eyes wide open, grateful that my family cared enough to introduce me to such a perfect man. Anna, there's someone I really think you should meet. Michael's words seemed innocent enough when he called that February afternoon. He was at a networking event, he explained, talking to a consultant who'd just moved to the area. Really interesting guy, educated, professional, seems like your type. I remember laughing. My type? Since when do you play matchmaker? Since I realized how much time you spend working and how little time you spend meeting actual human beings. He shot back with what seemed like genuine brotherly concern. Come on, just coffee. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words. Daniel Morrison was everything my family had promised and everything I thought I wanted. Tall, well-dressed without being flashy, with the kind of quiet confidence that suggested competence rather than arrogance. When Michael introduced us at a small cafe in Midtown, Daniel's handshake was firm, his smile genuine, his attention focused entirely on me rather than his phone or the room around us. Michael tells me you're in financial consulting, he said, settling into his chair with easy grace. That must be fascinating work, especially in this economic climate. Most men, when they learned about my career, either glazed over with disinterest or became immediately calculating about my potential earning power. Daniel seemed genuinely curious about the intellectual challenges of my work, asking thoughtful questions about market trends and regulatory changes. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about his engineering consulting practice, his recent move from Boston, his adjustment to New York's pace of life. Everything felt natural, unforced, comfortable in a way that first dates rarely achieve. When Emily called that evening to ask how coffee had gone, her excitement seemed authentic. I knew you'd like him, she said. He seems so steady, so different from the guys you usually attract. She was right about that. Daniel was different. He didn't try to impress me with expensive restaurants or flashy gestures. Our second date was a walk through Central Park, followed by pizza at a neighborhood place he claimed to have discovered. Our third was a cooking class where he laughed good-naturedly about his own culinary incompetence. He never asked about my apartment, never suggested expensive activities, never made any reference to money or lifestyle differences. When I offered to pay for dinner, he accepted gracefully without the weird masculinity issues that plagued so many men. When I mentioned work stress, he listened without trying to solve all my problems. For 3 months, Daniel was exactly what I didn't know I'd been missing. Someone who seemed genuinely interested in spending time with me, rather than impressing me or extracting something from me. Someone who appreciated my intelligence without being intimidated by my success. Emily and Michael were incredibly supportive throughout our developing relationship. They'd ask about Daniel regularly, offer encouragement when I expressed normal early relationship uncertainties, even invite him to family gatherings where he fit in seamlessly. He's so good for you, Emily told me one evening after Daniel had joined us for dinner. You seem more relaxed lately. Happier. I was happier. For the first time in years, I was in a relationship with someone who seemed to value me for reasons that had nothing to do with what I could provide. Daniel never asked for favors, never needed financial help, never even seemed particularly interested in my material possessions. He was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Which should have been my first clue that something was terribly wrong. Looking back, I can see the signs I missed during those 4 months with Daniel. They weren't obvious. He was too smart for that. But they were there. The way he always seemed to remember exactly where I'd placed my phone, his familiarity with my schedule, knowing when I'd be in meetings or working late, his casual questions about my banking habits, disguised as general conversation about financial security. But I was happy, genuinely, stupidly happy in a way I hadn't been for years. Daniel felt like proof that good things could happen to people who worked hard and made smart choices. He felt like validation that I deserved love that wasn't contingent on what I could provide. The relationship progressed naturally. Or at least it seemed natural to me. By May, Daniel was spending several nights a week at my apartment. He had a key, his own drawer in my dresser, a toothbrush in my bathroom. He knew my morning routine, my evening habits, my weekend preferences. He also knew my security patterns, my online behaviors, and the exact sequence I used to unlock my phone. The night everything changed started like so many others. We'd had dinner at home, watched a movie, talked about plans for the weekend. Daniel seemed relaxed, affectionate, completely present. When we went to bed around 11, he was exactly the man I'd been falling in love with for months. But Daniel had been waiting for this exact opportunity. While I slept beside him, he carefully memorized my phone's unlock pattern by watching my thumb movements in the dark. He noted which banking apps I had installed, which email accounts stayed logged in, which security questions I'd likely used based on conversations we'd had. Over the next 3 weeks, Daniel began systematically gathering everything he needed to access my finances. He'd casually mention topics that would reveal security question answers. My first pet's name, my childhood street address, my mother's maiden name. He'd observe my banking habits, noting when I checked accounts and how I typically interacted with financial apps. Emily's role during this period was crucial. As my sister, she had access to family information that completed Daniel's intelligence gathering. Birth dates, social security number hints, childhood details that financial institutions often use for identity verification. Growing up together, Emily had heard all my childhood stories and security question answers during countless family conversations over the years. She provided it all, later claiming she thought she was just helping Daniel plan surprise gifts and romantic gestures. But the FBI forensic accountants would eventually demonstrate that the information she shared was precisely calibrated for financial fraud, not gift shopping. The most sophisticated part of their operation was how slowly and carefully they moved. Daniel never tried to access my accounts directly from my apartment or devices. Instead, he meticulously noted information and recreated my digital footprint from external locations. By late May, Daniel had everything he needed: bank account numbers, credit card details, security question answers, even backup verification methods. He'd created comprehensive profiles that would allow him to pose as me in almost any financial context. But he waited. He waited until he was certain he could execute the fraud quickly and disappear completely. He waited until he'd identified the most profitable approach and planned his exit strategy. He waited until the morning he knew I'd be in back-to-back client meetings, unreachable for several hours while he systematically destroyed my financial life. That morning, I kissed him goodbye and told him I loved him. He smiled, said he loved me too, and wished me luck with my presentations. By lunchtime, my bank accounts were empty and my credit cards were maxed out with over $100,000 in fraudulent purchases. And Daniel Morrison had vanished as completely as if he'd never existed. The first sign something was wrong came at exactly 11:47 a.m. during my presentation to the Morrison Group. And yes, the irony of that name isn't lost on me now. I was mid-sentence explaining quarterly projections to a room full of potential clients when my phone buzzed with a bank alert. Insufficient funds for automatic mortgage payment. I glanced at the notification and felt my stomach drop. That was impossible. I'd had over $40,000 in my checking account that morning. I quickly dismissed it as a bank error and continued my presentation, but my hands were shaking as I clicked through the slides. By lunch break, I had 17 more alerts. Overdraft fees, declined transactions, security warnings about unusual account activity. Each notification felt like a physical blow. I excused myself to the bathroom and called my bank with trembling fingers. "Ms. Anderson, we've been trying to reach you," the representative said after I provided my identification. "There's been significant activity on your accounts this morning. Over $60,000 in wire transfers and numerous high-value purchases." The bathroom stall felt like it was spinning. "That's impossible. I haven't authorized any transfers. The transactions all appear to have proper authorization codes and security verification. Are you saying these weren't initiated by you?" I slumped against the stall door, feeling the blood drain from my face. "I need you to freeze everything. Right now. All accounts, all cards, everything. We can place a temporary hold, but you'll need to come in person to file a formal fraud report." What followed was the longest afternoon of my life. I somehow managed to finish my client presentation on autopilot, while my financial life imploded in real time. Every few minutes, another alert would arrive on my phone. Electronics purchases from Best Buy, luxury items from Nordstrom, cash advances from ATMs across the city. Someone was systematically draining everything I'd worked 15 years to build, and they were doing it with surgical precision. When I finally escaped the office at 4:30, I called Daniel first. Straight to voicemail. I tried his office number, disconnected. I drove to his apartment building and buzzed his unit. No answer. That's when the first cold finger of real fear touched my spine. I sat in my car outside Daniel's building for 30 minutes, calling and texting. getting nothing but silence in return. The Daniel I'd known for 4 months would never ignore my calls during a crisis. He'd be the first person rushing to help, unless Daniel was the crisis. I drove home in a daze, my mind rejecting what my instincts were screaming. When I walked into my apartment, I immediately noticed Daniel's drawer was empty. His toothbrush was gone. The spare key I'd given him was sitting on my kitchen counter with no note, no explanation, nothing. He'd vanished like he'd never existed, taking my life savings with him. But I still needed to believe there was some other explanation, because accepting the truth meant accepting that the man I'd been falling in love with was a criminal. It meant accepting that 4 months of happiness had been an elaborate con game. It meant accepting that my family had introduced me to someone who would destroy me. So I called Michael and Emily instead, because surely they could help explain what had happened to their friend Daniel. Surely they'd be as shocked and worried as I was. Their reactions told me everything I needed to know. "Anna, slow down," Michael said when I called him, hysterical and barely coherent. "What are you saying about Daniel?" "He's gone," I sobbed into the phone. "All my money is gone. Someone stole everything, and Daniel just disappeared. Michael, I need help. I don't know what to do." There was a pause that lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. "I'm sure there's an explanation," he said carefully. "Maybe he had a family emergency or something." Family emergency. Right. The kind that requires emptying someone's bank accounts and vanishing without a trace. "Can you come over?" I asked. "Please? I need to figure out what happened." "Of course," Michael said quickly. "Emily and I will be right there." Emily and I. Not just Michael. Both of them. Together. Like they'd been waiting for this call. They arrived within 20 minutes, which was impressive considering they supposedly lived in different parts of the city. Emily was carrying a box of tissues and wearing an expression of such exaggerated concern that it would have been comical if I hadn't been in the middle of a complete breakdown. "Oh, honey," she said, wrapping me in a hug that felt theatrical. "Tell us exactly what happened." So I did. I told them about the bank alerts, the unauthorized transactions, the massive fraudulent purchases. I showed them the statements on my laptop, the endless list of charges I'd never authorized. I explained how Daniel had vanished completely, leaving no trace that he'd ever been in my life. Michael and Emily exchanged glances throughout my recitation, quick, meaningful looks that they probably thought I was too distraught to notice. But I caught every single one. "This is terrible," Emily said when I finished. Her voice was perfectly modulated, hitting all the right notes of shock and sympathy. Who could do something like this? "Someone who had access to all my personal information," I said, watching her face carefully. "Someone who knew my security questions, my banking habits, my daily schedule." Another glance between my siblings. This one lasted longer. "You think Daniel did this?" Michael asked, and his tone was just slightly off, like he was reading from a script he hadn't quite memorized. "Who else could it have been?" I snapped. "He's the only person who had that level of access to my life." That's when Emily made her fatal mistake. "Well," she said with a little shrug, "maybe this will teach you not to trust strangers so easily." The words hit me like a physical slap. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "What did you say?" "I just meant," Emily backtracked quickly, seeing my expression, "that you should be more careful about who you let into your life." "Emily," I said slowly, "I just told you that I've lost everything. Over $100,000. And your response is that it's my fault for trusting the man you introduced me to?" "That's not what I meant," she protested. But the damage was done. Michael jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "Anna, Emily's just upset. We all are." She didn't mean it like that. But I was watching Emily's face and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. It wasn't guilt or regret or even embarrassment. It was satisfaction. For just a moment before she caught herself, Emily looked pleased. "Get out," I said quietly. "Anna, don't be dramatic," Michael started. "Get out!" I screamed, and both of them jerked back like I'd slapped them. "Both of you, right now." They left, still making protests and excuses, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was thinking about Emily's expression, about Michael's carefully scripted responses, about how quickly they'd both arrived together. I was thinking about 4 months of them encouraging my relationship with Daniel, asking pointed questions about how serious we were getting, celebrating every milestone like they were genuinely invested in my happiness. I was thinking about how they'd known exactly what to say to make me trust him completely. That night, I cried. I cried for the money, for the betrayal, for the stupidity of believing that my family actually wanted what was best for me. I cried until I was empty, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. But when I woke up the next morning, something fundamental had changed inside me. The grief was still there, but it was wrapped in something harder now, something that felt like steel. I'd spent 32 years being the family peacekeeper, the one who absorbed everyone else's problems and smoothed over conflicts. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to earn approval from people who would apparently rather destroy me than see me succeed. That version of Anna died somewhere in the darkness of that night. The woman who woke up the next morning was someone entirely different. Someone who understood that when your own family declares war on you, the only response is to win decisively. I had work to do. What do you think will happen next? Drop your predictions in the comments below. The new Anna didn't waste time on self-pity or wishful thinking. The new Anna understood that hoping for justice and actually getting it were two very different things. By 7 a.m., I was dressed in my most professional suit, armed with every piece of documentation I could gather, and ready to declare war on behalf of myself. My first stop was the bank, where I spent 3 hours with their fraud department, providing detailed statements about Daniel's access to my personal information. The investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Collins, took copious notes as I explained the timeline of our relationship and the systematic way Daniel had gathered my security details. This level of sophistication suggests organized fraud, she told me. Someone with experience in financial crimes. We'll need to involve federal investigators. Good. I wanted everyone involved who had the power to make this hurt. My second stop was the law office of Rodriguez and Associates, where I'd researched the city's most aggressive white-collar crime attorneys. Marcus Rodriguez listened to my story with the kind of intense focus that justified his $600 hourly rate. Your siblings introduced you to this man? He asked, leaning back in his leather chair. And they were aware of his background in logistics fraud? I paused. I don't know if they knew about his criminal history, but they definitely knew something was wrong after he disappeared. Their reactions were, I searched for the right word, rehearsed. Marcus made a note. We'll need to explore their potential involvement. If they knowingly participated in a scheme to defraud you, they're not just witnesses. They're conspirators. The word hit me like ice water. Conspirators. My own siblings as criminals actively working to destroy me. What kind of evidence would you need to prove conspiracy? I asked. Communications between them and Daniel. Financial records showing they benefited from the fraud. Witness testimony about their behavior before and after the crime. He looked at me directly. Are you prepared for the possibility that your family members could face serious jail time if we prove they were involved? I thought about Emily's satisfied smirk, about Michael's scripted concern, about a lifetime of being treated like a convenient resource rather than a human being. Yes, I said without hesitation. I'm prepared for that. My third stop was the FBI field office in Federal Plaza, where Special Agent Jennifer Kim specialized in financial crimes and identity theft. She reviewed my documentation with professional thoroughness, asking detailed questions about Daniel's methods and my siblings' knowledge of our relationship. The sophistication of this operation is concerning, she told me. Mr. Morrison, if that's even his real name, knew exactly what information to gather and how to use it. That suggests either extensive experience or inside coaching from someone familiar with financial fraud techniques. Or both, I suggested. Agent Kim nodded. Or both. We'll start with tracking the fraudulent purchases and wire transfers. Most criminals in these cases aren't as careful about the money trail as they are about the initial theft. She was right about that, as it turned out. Daniel might have been brilliant at manipulating people, but he was surprisingly sloppy about covering his tracks once he had access to my accounts. That evening, I sat in my apartment with 3 different legal pads covered in timelines, contact information, and potential evidence. For the first time since discovering the fraud, I felt something other than devastation. I felt purposeful. Emily called around 8 o'clock, her voice carefully concerned. Anna, I've been worried about you all day. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said calmly. Actually, I'm better than fine. I spent the day talking to fraud investigators, federal agents, and criminal attorneys. Everyone seems very optimistic about catching Daniel and prosecuting him to the fullest extent of the law. There was a long pause. Prosecutors? Anna, don't you think that's a little extreme? Maybe you should just work with the insurance company and move on. Move on. Right. Because losing over $100,000 to criminal fraud was just one of those things you should get over quickly. Actually, Emily, the federal investigators were very interested in how Daniel gained access to my personal information. They want to interview everyone who knew about our relationship, everyone who encouraged it, everyone who had access to family details that might have helped him answer security questions. Another pause. Longer this time. What are you saying? I'm saying that anyone who helped Daniel, knowingly or unknowingly, could potentially face charges as an accessory to federal fraud. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Anna, Emily said finally, and her voice was different now, smaller. You're not thinking clearly. You've been through a trauma. Maybe you should talk to someone before you make any rash decisions. Rash decisions, like reporting serious crimes to law enforcement instead of quietly absorbing the loss like a good little victim. I am thinking clearly, Emily. For the first time in years, actually. Good night. I hung up before she could respond, then immediately called Agent Kim's direct line and left a voicemail about Emily's suspicious reaction to news of the federal investigation. Some people might call that ruthless. I call it learning from experience. The investigation moved faster than I'd expected, probably because Daniel had been spectacularly careless about covering his electronic footprints. Within 2 weeks, Agent Kim called with news that made my hands shake with vindication. We traced the delivery addresses for the fraudulent purchases, she told me. Everything was sent to a private mailbox facility in Queens, registered under a false name but paid for with a credit card that leads back to your brother Michael. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. Michael paid for Daniel's P.O. box? The credit card was registered to Michael Chen, same address as your family records show. We're pulling surveillance footage from the mailbox facility now. The footage, when I saw it 3 days later, was like watching my own family commit crimes in real time. There was Michael, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses like some amateur spy, retrieving packages from the mailbox Daniel had used for my stolen purchases. There was Emily, also disguised with a hat and oversized sunglasses, carrying bags of electronics that had been bought with my credit card. They thought they were being clever with their disguises. They looked like children playing dress-up as criminals. The timestamps matched the dates of the fraudulent purchases, Agent Kim explained as we reviewed the footage in her office. Your brother picked up items the same day they were delivered. Your sister was with him for at least 6 separate retrieval visits. I stared at the screen, watching my siblings load stolen merchandise into Michael's car with casual efficiency. They planned this together. The evidence suggests a coordinated conspiracy. Yes, we've also located Daniel Morrison. My heart jumped. You found him? He's in custody in Philadelphia, caught trying to sell electronics that match the serial numbers from your stolen purchases. His laptop contained detailed files about your financial information, family background, and personal security details. Agent Kim opened another folder and showed me printed screenshots of text messages. These are communications between Morrison and your siblings recovered from his phone. I read the messages with growing horror and rage. Michael to Daniel. She checks her bank account every morning at 7 a.m., never on weekends. Emily to Daniel. Her first pet was a golden retriever named Buddy. Security question answer. Daniel to Michael. Ready to execute on Thursday. Anna has back-to-back meetings until 2 p.m. Window is clear. Emily to Daniel. Make sure the transfers look like legitimate business expenses. She's smart enough to notice if they're too obvious. Michael to Daniel. Split is still 30-30-40. I want confirmation before we proceed. Every message was a knife in my chest. They hadn't just known about Daniel's plan, they'd been active participants. They'd provided inside information, technical advice, and logistical support. They'd helped him time the attacks and cover his tracks. They'd planned to divide my stolen money between the 3 of them. This is enough for conspiracy charges? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. More than enough. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, money laundering. If convicted on all counts, they're looking at significant prison time. Agent Kim closed the folder. We'll be executing arrest warrants tomorrow morning. I wanted you to know in advance in case family members try to contact you. They did try to contact me, of course. Michael called that evening, his voice tight with panic. Anna, we need to talk. There are some things about Daniel that you don't understand. Really? I said conversationally. Like how you helped him steal my money. Or how you 3 planned to split $100,000 between yourselves. The silence was absolute. I don't know what you think you know, Michael said finally, but all the confidence had drained out of his voice. I know exactly what I know, Michael. I've seen the text messages. I've seen the surveillance footage of you picking up packages bought with my stolen credit cards. I've seen the bank records showing you paid for Daniel's P.O. box with your own credit card. Anna, let me explain. The only explanation that matters is the one you'll give to federal prosecutors, I said, assuming your attorney advises you to cooperate instead of pleading the 5th. I hung up and immediately blocked his number, then did the same for Emily when she tried calling 30 seconds later. That night, I ordered Chinese takeout and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Watching my siblings get arrested tomorrow definitely qualified as special. The FBI came for them at 6 a.m. I know because Agent Kim called to confirm the arrests had been executed without incident. Both your siblings are in federal custody, she told me. Daniel Morrison has agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's provided detailed statements about their roles in planning and executing the fraud. I felt a satisfaction so deep and complete that it was almost spiritual. For once in my life, People who had hurt me were facing actual consequences for their actions. Justice, it turned out, was even sweeter than I'd imagined. You might expect that watching my siblings get arrested for conspiring to steal my money would have been the end of the story. You might think that justice being served would bring me peace and closure, allowing me to move forward with my life. You would be adorably naive, because what happened next taught me something crucial about family dynamics. When some family members get caught doing terrible things, the rest of the family doesn't rally around the victim. They rally around the criminals. My parents' reaction to Michael and Emily's arrests was swift, predictable, and absolutely enraging. The arrests had happened at dawn, but news travels fast in families, especially when people are panicking. "Anna, what have you done?" My mother sobbed into the phone at 7:30 a.m., barely an hour after the arrest. "How could you have your own brother and sister arrested? They're your family. They stole over $100,000 from me," I said calmly, though my grip on the phone was white-knuckled. "They conspired with a criminal to commit federal fraud. They're thieves, Mom. It's just money," she wailed. "You'll make more money. But if Michael and Emily go to prison, their lives are ruined forever. Their children will grow up without parents. How can you live with yourself? Just money. $100,000 was just money. But somehow my siblings' decision to steal it was just a mistake that I should overlook for the sake of family harmony." My father was more direct in his blame. "You've destroyed this family," he told me when he called an hour later. "Your brother and sister made some poor choices, but what you've done is unforgivable. Turning in your own family to the authorities? I didn't raise you to be vindictive." Vindictive. As if expecting consequences for major felonies was somehow petty revenge rather than basic accountability. "They committed serious crimes, Dad. Multiple federal crimes. What exactly did you expect me to do? Work it out within the family," he snapped. "Go to counseling together, set up a payment plan, handle it privately instead of airing our business to strangers and destroying your siblings' futures." A payment plan. For money they'd already spent on electronics they'd sold for cash. Money I'd never see again unless federal prosecutors recovered it through asset seizure. The calls kept coming all day. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. Everyone had an opinion about my betrayal of Michael and Emily. Everyone seemed to believe that being related to criminals was more important than being the victim of their crimes. My Aunt Margaret was particularly venomous. "You always were a selfish child," she told me. "Even when you were little, you had to be the center of attention. Now you're destroying innocent people's lives just to get back at them for having problems." Innocent people. As if conspiracy to commit federal fraud was the same as having problems. Uncle Robert tried a different approach. "Anna, I know you're hurt, but think about the children. Michael's kids, Emily's kids. They don't deserve to have their parents in prison because of a family dispute." A family dispute. That's what they were calling felony fraud now. "Their parents should have thought about their children before they decided to commit federal crimes," I said. "You're being heartless," he replied. By evening, I'd received 47 phone calls, 32 text messages, and 68 emails from various family members, all expressing variations of the same sentiment. I was a terrible person for holding my siblings accountable for stealing my life savings. Not one person asked how I was doing. Not one person expressed sympathy for what I'd been through. Not one person suggested that maybe Michael and Emily bore some responsibility for the situation they'd created. I was the villain for reporting crimes that had been committed against me. The social media attacks started that night. Emily's friends, people I'd known for years, began posting about the tragedy of her arrest. According to Facebook, Emily was a wonderful mother who was being persecuted by a vindictive family member who couldn't forgive honest mistakes. Honest mistakes. Like conspiring for months to commit identity theft and federal fraud was just an oopsie-daisy that got out of hand. Michael's business associates rallied around him too, sharing posts about how family feuds shouldn't involve law enforcement, how successful people like me should be more understanding of those facing financial difficulties. Financial difficulties that they'd tried to solve by stealing from me. By the end of the week, I'd lost most of my extended family, several longtime friends, and probably half of my social circle. People I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. Acquaintances stopped returning my calls. Even some of my professional contacts began treating me differently after word spread about the family situation. I'd become a pariah for doing exactly what any rational person would do when victimized by serious crimes. But here's what I learned from that experience. When people show you who they really are, believe them. When they make it clear that they value criminals over victims, that they prioritize family loyalty over basic morality, that they think blood relations trump accountability, listen to them. They're telling you everything you need to know about whether they deserve a place in your life. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my apartment. the same apartment that started all this trouble by being too nice for my family to tolerate. And I can honestly say that losing most of my relatives has been the best thing that's happened to me in years. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in unexpected places. The legal resolution was exactly what you'd expect when the FBI builds an airtight case with text message evidence, surveillance footage, and a cooperating witness. Michael and Emily both pled guilty to conspiracy charges, rather than risk trial. Daniel, true to his deal with prosecutors, testified against them in detail. Michael got 18 months in federal prison. Emily got 15 months. Daniel got 2 years, but he'll serve most of it in minimum security since he cooperated fully. They're all required to pay restitution, though realistically, I'll never recover more than a fraction of what they stole. But here's the thing about justice. Sometimes it's not about the money. The bank insurance and federal asset recovery programs covered about 60% of my losses. Not everything, but enough to rebuild. More importantly, watching my siblings face actual consequences for their choices gave me something I'd never had before: the knowledge that I was worth defending. I'd spent 32 years accepting that my role in the family was to absorb problems, smooth conflicts, and prioritize everyone else's needs over my own well-being. I'd been trained from childhood to believe that setting boundaries was selfish, that expecting accountability was unreasonable, that family loyalty meant accepting abuse disguised as love. The fraud case forced me to choose between enabling criminals and protecting myself. For the first time in my life, I chose me. That choice cost me relationships with people who apparently believed that being related to someone was more important than basic decency. It cost me the illusion that blood family would automatically support me during my worst moments. It cost me the fantasy that unconditional love actually existed among people who'd spent decades treating my success as their personal checking account. But it gave me something infinitely more valuable: self-respect. These days, my social circle is smaller but infinitely healthier. I have friends who celebrate my achievements instead of resenting them. I have colleagues who respect my boundaries instead of testing them. I have a therapist who's helped me understand that loving people doesn't require accepting their mistreatment. I even have a new romantic relationship with someone I met through work, someone who knew nothing about my family situation or financial status when we started dating, someone who likes me for reasons that have nothing to do with what I can provide for him. Most importantly, I have the knowledge that I can survive devastating betrayal and come out stronger. My parents still call occasionally, usually when they want me to forgive and move forward for the sake of family unity. They don't seem to understand that forgiveness doesn't require giving people additional opportunities to hurt you. They definitely don't understand that family unity based on enabling criminal behavior isn't actually unity. It's complicity. Michael and Emily send letters sometimes, usually around holidays or their birthdays. The letters are full of self-pity and requests for financial help with their legal fees. I file them in the same folder where I keep my case documentation, right next to the text messages where they plan to steal my money. Some people might call that harsh. I call it learning from experience. Because here's what I discovered during the darkest period of my life. Sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who taught you how to be strong. Sometimes losing a toxic family teaches you what real love actually looks like. Sometimes being betrayed by people you trusted completely teaches you to trust yourself more than anyone else. And sometimes, just sometimes, justice feels exactly as good as you hoped it would. I still live in the same Manhattan apartment that made my siblings so envious, they decided to destroy my life rather than build their own. But now, when I look around at the marble countertops and river view and custom lighting, I don't see material success that needs to be hidden or minimized. I see evidence of what I can accomplish when I'm not carrying other people's problems on my shoulders. I see proof that I deserve beautiful things, honest relationships, and respect from the people in my life. Most of all, I see a space that belongs entirely to me. No family drama allowed. No criminal conspirators welcome. No apologies required for the audacity of succeeding on my own terms. The handcuffs clicking shut on Emily's wrists might have been the end of her freedom, but for me, it was the beginning of mine. And that, honestly, was worth every penny they tried to steal.